It was the look in her eyes that threw me off, like she was silently begging me to figure it out. Her lips parted ever so slightly, but she said nothing, and for a moment the silence felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. My name's Sam, and I've always thought I was pretty good at reading people, until that night. It started like any other evening. I was hanging out with a close friend, a woman I'd known for years, someone who had always been easy to talk to. Emily and I had this effortless chemistry, though we'd always kept things strictly platonic, or so I thought. That night something was different. She seemed restless. At first I chalked it up to stress, or just being tired. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. I'm doing this video because I realized that most guys, like me, miss the subtle signals women give when they're turned on. If I hadn't lived through this, I'd still be clueless about what was happening that night. I want to share what I learned so that you don't end up like me, sitting there oblivious, while she's practically screaming, "I want you," without saying a word. By the end of this story, you'll know how to spot those signals and never second-guess yourself again. Before we dive deeper, let's lay the groundwork. Women often don't come right out and say, "I'm into you." Instead, their bodies do the talking. I've since learned that science backs this up. Subtle gestures like lip biting or lingering touches aren't random, they're clues. But back then, I didn't have a guide. I had to piece it together the hard way through experience, so let me be your guide. It started small. Emily and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie. She was unusually quiet, her body leaning slightly toward mine. Then, she bit her lip. I didn't think much of it at first. People bite their lips all the time, right? But then she did it again, this time catching my eye afterward. Her gaze lingered just a little too long, and that's when I noticed something different. Her pupils were huge, even in the dim light of the room. My mind flashed to something I'd read once. Dilated pupils can be a sign of attraction. Still, I wasn't sure. Was I imagining things? As the night wore on, her behavior became harder to ignore. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushing against mine when she reached for the popcorn bowl, her knee lightly bumping against mine under the table. But these weren't the casual, accidental touches I'd come to expect in our friendship. They lingered, each one charged with an undercurrent of tension that left my skin tingling in their wake. Her fingers grazed my arm when she laughed at a joke, the warmth of her touch staying with me long after the moment had passed. It wasn't just her actions, but the way she looked at me afterward, her eyes flickering to mine as if checking to see if I noticed. Was I imagining this? Was she really flirting? Or was I just projecting my own feelings onto her? I found myself overanalyzing every move she made, caught between doubt and the growing certainty that something was shifting between us. Then came the moment that shattered my hesitation. She stood up to grab a drink from the kitchen, her figure moving past me, and I couldn't help but follow her with my eyes. But this wasn't the usual casual stride I'd seen countless times before. Her hips swayed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind of movement that was impossible to mistake. It was as if she was completely aware of the effect she was having on me, and she wasn't just okay with it. She wanted me to notice. The way her body moved was almost hypnotic, each step radiating a confidence and sensuality I hadn't seen from her before. It wasn't overt, but it wasn't subtle either. There was a message in that walk, and it was loud and clear. She wanted me to see her differently. She reached the kitchen, and I thought I caught her glancing over her shoulder, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile before she turned away. Suddenly, all those little touches, those lingering glances, it all made sense. She wasn't just being friendly. This was intentional. She was sending signals, testing the waters, seeing if I'd pick up on her cues. My heart raced as I realized the moment of truth was approaching. The tension in the room was almost palpable when she came back. She sat closer this time, her leg brushing against mine. Her breathing seemed heavier, and she was biting her lip again, stealing glances at me. My heart was racing, but I still hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if this ruined everything? But then her hand lightly grazed my thigh. A touch so subtle, it could have been accidental, but her eyes told a different story. She was waiting for me to make the next move. This was the darkest moment. The uncertainty, the fear of crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I didn't want to misinterpret her actions and make a fool of myself. But I also didn't want to ignore what was clearly happening. My mind was racing with doubt. What if I made a move and she wasn't into it? What if I ruined our friendship? The stakes felt impossibly high. Then I remembered something a friend had told me years ago. Sometimes women won't say what they want, but they'll show you. Pay attention to their body language. That thought gave me the courage to trust my instincts. I looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw the way her body was angled toward mine, the flush in her cheeks, the slight parting of her lips. She wasn't just sitting there, she was inviting me in. With newfound confidence, I leaned in slightly, testing the waters. She didn't pull away. Instead, she met me halfway, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that felt like it had been waiting to happen for years. In that moment, all the tension melted away. It was as if her body had been speaking a language I'd finally learned to understand. Looking back, I realized how many signals I'd missed before that night. Not just with Emily, but with other women as well. It's not always about grand gestures or outright words. Often it's the little things, the lingering touches, the way her hips move, the look in her eyes. Once you know what to look for, it's like unlocking a secret code. That night changed everything, not just between Emily and me, but for how I navigate relationships now. I've learned to trust my instincts and pay closer attention to nonverbal cues. It's made me more confident, not just in romantic situations, but in life overall. So here's the takeaway. Women communicate their desire in ways that are subtle yet unmistakable if you're paying attention. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back. When you notice those signs like lip biting, lingering touches, or dilated pupils, trust yourself and take the next step. Now, I'm not saying every situation will be as clear as mine with Emily, but understanding these cues can help you connect on a deeper level. If you've ever wondered whether she's into you, now you know what to look for. So next time, don't hesitate. Listen to what her body's telling you, and trust me, you won't regret it.